Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. Welcome back to today's episode of Pushing Through Loss. We have with us Sam, or Samantha. We just decided she goes by either. And I know I said excited is the wrong word, but I'm really excited that you're here to share your story, because it's one of those in terms of pregnancy loss and stillbirth that people just don't know where to turn. And to hear stories from others who have experienced it, first of all, makes it feel less lonely, and also provides resources to know where you can actually go if you're experiencing something like this. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor, and I'm excited to speak to you too, even though that is absolutely the wrong word.
Well, so let's start at the beginning, because I know right before we recorded, we were talking a little bit about my background with loss and surrogacy, and you had a stillbirth 2 days before your due date, which I mean, going through it at 16 and a half weeks was awful enough. I couldn't even imagine being that close to my due date and really ready to take your baby home and going
Yeah.
through it.
I mean, that was our exact story. I mean, it was my first pregnancy. It was in 2013. It had been a totally normal, healthy, quote unquote, low risk pregnancy. You know, I was told everything was textbook the whole time. And I did like I was so into being, like you were saying, pregnancy was your superpower. Like I loved being pregnant. I had a beautiful, blissful pregnancy, and I was so like into it. And I like, did all of the prenatal yoga and like, eating all my organic stuff. And I took a 10-week birthing course. I read every book, blog, website I could get my hands on. Like, I honestly thought I knew everything there was to know about stillbirth. And our daughter, Alana, was just so she was the first grandchild on both sides of the family. And we had just gotten married like the year before. We had just bought our forever home. It was like the culmination of all of our dreams coming true. And so you can imagine our shock and horror and devastation when we walked into the hospital 2 days before her due date, in labor, thinking we're bringing home our baby girl, only to be told she no longer has a heartbeat. We were just completely blindsided. I mean, I had no idea that this could happen to anyone in this day.
Especially when you're already in labor and you're already like, okay, let's go. It's time to go to the hospital.
Yeah, exactly. I was just like, and I could see when they broke the news, I could like, I just kind of went into this mode of just putting I'm behind a glass wall, I'm just like trying to process like what is going on. I mean, that's the shock, right? My husband's crying hysterically behind me, the technician and the midwife are looking at me, and like they could see. And the midwife, one of the first things she says, it was like, if there was anything we could do, you would be on an operating table
Right.
already.
Right.
Like, and yeah, it was just so, I just remember we called my parents. Of course, the whole family knew I was in labor. They're all waiting for the call and say, oh, baby's here, or,
Right.
come to the hospital because it's almost time.
Right.
And then they get a call saying the baby is gone. And I
Do
just
they know what happened?
so I did eventually find out. At this time, no. At this time, they were like,
So you're completely in the dark. You
dark.
think like your body has failed you. You have no idea what happened.
Exactly. And my parents are just saying, that's impossible. That's impossible. And I'm like, I know it's impossible, but this is what they're telling me.
Right.
And yeah, we were just so lost. So, they given us the option to go home and wait it out, or to go down to labor and delivery. They're like, you're definitely in labor, but we could give you a Pitocin or something to try to help move things along more quickly. And at this point, I'm just like, I just want out of this nightmare, right, as fast as possible. So we went, we opted to go for an induction. And of course, at this point, I was like 100% committed to doing like a natural birth, unmedicated, all that stuff. And all those plans just went right out the window.
Right. You're like, just get the baby out at this point.
Exactly. Like, I mean, and again, like the midwife like read my mind, and she was just like, I could do a C-section, but if you're planning to have other kids, it would really be better for you to
Have a
do it
natural birth.
vaginally. And I was like,
Right.
okay. And like my husband is like so just appalled, because it didn't even occur to him initially that I still had to give birth to her.
Right.
And
Right.
this
Like
is
then, because I can imagine he's sitting there like, okay, so let's just go home. If there's no baby, like we're done.
we're done, right? And yeah, and he's just like how cruel is that to
Right.
have to, to have to watch your loved one go through. Yeah, so he was a wreck. I was a wreck. We were all a wreck. And yeah, the so I ended up, they thought it would take a while, but I was pretty, I had been in early labor for a good like 24 hours by that point. And so it happened very quickly once I had the induction. It was like a few hours.
That's like the
Um,
only saving grace about the whole situation.
Yes, yes. And that they gave me an epidural, which again, I was like kind of freaking out because I'm just like, I did no research on this because I was
Right.
certain I was not getting an epidural under any circumstance.
Right.
Here we are.
Right.
Um, you know, and and of course at this point, my number one concern is I need to keep myself alive. Like I can't even process what I'm going through. All I know is that this family is not going to be able to take it if they lose me too. So I was just trying to focus on getting through it.
Mhm.
And so yeah, so it was a shockingly quick, easy labor. When it got to pushing, she came out in about 2 pushes.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I just was so, I didn't know what to expect. This was, I had could count on one hand the number of times I've like seen a dead body in my life. And it had never been anybody that was like super close to me. That like honestly, the worst loss I'd had up to that point was like my childhood dog. So I knew nothing about grief or any of this stuff. And I have to remember while I was in labor looking at my mom and being like, are they going to expect me to hold her when she comes out? And thank God my mom, who was much more experienced, not with anything like this, but she lost her dad when she was 17. And she was just like, you want to hold her. You're going to want to hold
Right.
her.
You're gonna regret it if you don't.
Exactly. And it was nice because we had actually all the nurses there. One of them had like 8 miscarriages, like, there were
Wow.
people around. I don't think any of them had been a stillbirth mom in particular, but like
They
they knew
experience loss.
exactly. And in retrospect, as I learned more about bereavement care and things like that, like they did all the right things. They told us the right things. We unfortunately did not take their good advice a lot of the times, but they
Well, because
did.
you also think of labor and delivery as just that, like you're bringing a new life into this world. So what could these nurses possibly know about loss, even though they probably experience this more often than we realize?
Yeah, exactly. Far more often than especially at that point we realized. And so they gave us all the good advice, but of course we like idiots sent home the good camera, sent home all her clothes, like, we just wanted to get through it.
Right.
But thankfully, she was born and she was just beautiful. She was perfect. She looked like a sleeping baby. She was warm. She had this gorgeous head of dark hair. She had her dad's like long fingernails and long eyelashes, and it was just the most heartbreaking thing because I'm like, just wake up,
Right.
please. Just wake up.
Right. They look like a little sleeping doll.
Here and you're perfect. I mean, to this day, honestly, I can't you always like parents like to do like the pictures of their newborn sleeping on like the card. I'm just like, nope, awake pictures only because that's the only way I know
It's
baby is alive.
right. And it's a
Like
trigger for you.
just seeing a sleeping baby is
Right.
triggering for me, and certainly a sleeping baby in black and white because that's always how they do the bereavement photos too.
Right.
So yeah, so it was just so bittersweet. I thought that her birth was going to be horrible, and again in retrospect, it was really like the best day because it was the only day I got to be with her.
Right.
And thankfully, we it was 2013, so we had really crappy cell phone cameras. But the nurses did snaps, make sure to snap some for us, and so we have at least a handful of pictures together. And we again have put all of her clothes home and stuff, but they were very sweet and took it upon themselves to bathe her and put her in a hat that some other parent before me had knitted and
Wow.
had there on hand, and they took beautiful pictures of her like under the wheel under machine. And I'm so grateful for those women because I would have nothing.
Nothing. Right.
um and yeah, so of course we held her for about an hour, and then they went home. I mean, like we stayed overnight. like, but within, I just could not wait to get out of there. Within 24 hours after arriving in the hospital, we were on our way out. And,
Right.
we get in my husband pulls around with the car, with the brand new car seat in the back, you
Right. And they
know,
have to wheelchair you down even though you have
oh,
nothing to hold.
no, here's the best part. They didn't even give me the dignity of a wheelchair. It turns out the wheelchair is not for the mom, it's for the baby because they're worried you're going to drop the newborn. So when it was time to
So
go,
you had to walk out of the
like,
hospital?
okay, see ya. And I just like had to stand up on my own 2 feet, walk past the nursery full of living babies
Oh my God, my
out of the
heart
hospital.
like breaks for you in that moment.
Thank you. Yeah, it was horrific. And then to get in the car seat. And it was funny because I'm so neurotic about car seat safety. Like I had gotten it like professionally installed and like checked by the police and like,
Right.
we couldn't get it out. Like I mean I
Oh,
tried to get the damn thing out and throw it in the back and it wouldn't. It was
oh,
so securely in there that I couldn't get the car seat out. So we were just like, oh my God.
this is like a sick joke.
The sick joke. Yes, it was horrific. And yeah, it was really tough. And so at the time, again, no answers. And they had said, well, it's, when she was born, they were like, maybe there'll be like a knot or something in the cord, and there wasn't. They were like, so maybe it just like got kinked or something. They're like, I'm not really sure. And they're like, you could do an autopsy, but we don't know. It's what it's going to show is that the baby's heart stopped, which we already know that's not very useful.
Right.
And I don't know if it's going to be covered by insurance, blah 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 blah. It might be several $1,000s. And I was just like, oh my God, like. But I was just like, I need answers. I
Right.
mean, many people in that situation, like probably about half of stillbirth families, don't get answers
Right.
because they hear things like that and they say, no, like I can't afford what they couldn't even give me an estimate of how much it would cost if I had to pay out of pocket for the
Wow.
for the autopsy. So I was
And
like,
at that point, you're like, this is my first. I need to know answers because for any subsequent pregnancies, what's going to happen?
yes, exactly. That was my first question. My actual OB when she came in the next day, of course she was not the one on call. She was like, I was like, when can I get pregnant again? I mean, that
Right.
was the first thing. I'm like, I gotta get back on the horse, and which is insane. And
But I know a lot of people that have been through it
yeah,
now
exactly,
that think the exact same
the
thing.
exact same
It's
thing.
like the coping mechanism to say, if I can have a baby, I just want to bring a baby home.
I just want to bring a baby home. Exactly. Like if there was a baby at the hospital that I could have adopted that day, which was
Right.
within a few years later, that show came out, This Is Us, and that was like the exact
Oh, that's so
happened.
funny.
Yeah,
Right.
the opening episode, they have triplets and one of them dies, but there happened to be a baby that was abandoned at the firehouse that day.
I
And
had no idea. I've never watched the show, so
yeah, oh, it's a good one. You should watch it. But yeah, no, it was. I was just like, oh wow, yeah, I totally would have done that.
you're like, yep, yep, check. I got it.
Yeah,
Done.
the show I think took place in like the 70s, so like this wouldn't have
Right.
flown in 2013. But
Right.
if I had the option, I totally would have.
Start scouring every firehouse that you pass by. Anybody drop
Exactly.
off a baby?
Yeah, no, it was so terrible. And so yeah, but I did. I opted. I was just like, you know what? I'm lucky enough that I mean, hopefully it's not $20,000, but if it is, I will find a way to pay for it.
Right.
And it turns out it's typically more like 2,000, and actually it didn't cost me anything.
Wow.
The hospital does it for free in many cases in the case of a loss.
Oh,
And so yeah, they took care of it for me. So I was lucky in that way. At least I didn't have to pay for it. But yeah, but as I suspected, it kind of came back pretty useless. I mean, it's said that she was perfectly healthy, and by process of elimination, it must have been a cord accident.
but like
But
there was a clot in the cord or something.
yeah, but no, but there was no evidence of a clot in the core. There was no evidence of like the only thing that
Wow.
I noticed on that when we finally got the results back was that it said that her cord was unusually short. Actually, it didn't say this on the report. It had the measurements of her cord, and and I remember my mom was saying, my mom was just like, I don't really know much. She's like, I had 3 kids, but I honestly don't know that much about birth. But I can tell you, like, that cord looked weird. Like, it looked weird enough that she said something to the midwife
Oh,
after
interesting.
labor. And she was just like, she was like, it looked like a Christmas ribbon. It was like so flat and thin. And my mom was like, I said to the midwife, like, this doesn't look right. And the midwife was just like, oh no, it's just because, the baby died and there's no blood in it. But it turns out that is not true. So
Right.
this is where set me on my path to finding answers, and then to being really pissed off, and then to eventually starting push and trying to change things for other parents going forward.
Mm.
traumatized to go through what we went through. So, I started researching cord accidents and stuff. And I found Dr. Jason Collins, who I think a lot of people in the community are familiar with. He's retired now, but he is a researcher specializing in umbilical cords. He has a book on Instagram, which basically puts all of his, 50 years of knowledge in there. Highly
Wow.
recommend it, except it's very graphic. So like if you're a new lost mom, you may not want to look at it.
Right.
But it is
But it highly informative, I'm sure.
highly informative. So yeah, so and in seeing then the averages and stuff and talking to him, I learned that Alana's cord actually was abnormally short.
Okay.
It was abnormally thin. And that ribbon likeness meant that it was hypocoiled. It didn't have enough of that protective coiling. And so
Interesting.
what happened was as she got bigger, towards the end of the pregnancy, her cord was just getting compressed.
So the
And
only thing that you could have done was potentially have a C-section earlier
yeah, or an induction
or an
earlier.
induction, right?
Yeah. So that, and that's, and again, so the problem for me was that the initially what I was told by the doctors and pieced together was that it was an acute cord accident, meaning this just happened that last night of her life.
Mm,
I carried so much guilt because I felt her struggling that night. I was
mm,
laid down in bed and, she was always active at a particular time every night. But this night it felt very different.
mm,
Like it was like waves rolling through my belly. And, the thing was that I knew that I had been having Braxton Hicks contractions, but I hadn't felt them yet. So I was like,
mm.
oh, this must be a Braxton Hicks contraction. So I'm laying there smiling, thinking, okay, keep
Right. You're
practicing.
gonna you're gonna
Coming
be meeting her
through.
soon.
Exactly. And meanwhile, she's struggling for her life inside me. And then when it finally stopped, I got up and went because I had to pee the whole time, but I was holding it so that she could keep practicing.
Right.
When I got up to go to the bathroom, I found the teeniest bit of blood, which I'd never seen before. But I'd had my membrane stripped earlier that day, and they had said, "Oh, you might get a little bit of bleeding." So I just
Yep.
didn't think about it. And
Or it could have been part of your mucus plug, or who knows?
exactly. I just didn't, again, first time pregnancy and
Right.
first time pregnancy is shown to be a risk factor for stillbirth, because you have nothing to compare it to and nobody
Right.
really tells you any of these things. So yeah, so for a long time, and then in the couple of years after that was when several reports came out of Australia showing a very clear link between sleeping on your back in the third trimester and stillbirth. And guess how I slept every single
So
night?
then, of course, you feel guilty again because you're going
I'm
through
just
every night where you're like, I shouldn't have slept on my back.
slept on my back. I mean, I didn't know
Right.
any better,
But of
but
course, that didn't have anything to do with it. It was that
exactly.
report
All
that
I
you're
could
like,
think
I
was,
have to find something.
yeah, if I just rolled over,
Right.
maybe she would be alive,
Right.
like, and I mean that level of self blame and guilt and shame and regret is just soul shredding. I
It
mean,
runs deep.
I just for that first year, I mean, there were months where I just spent the entire day just sobbing on the floor of her nursery until I had nothing left in me. And then I would get up and go do something mindless, like read BuzzFeed articles. and then, and then as soon as I had numbed myself enough, then I would go back and like read. At this point in time, there wasn't like the lost community and social media like we have today. So I would like desperately search Google searching for like stillbirth blog. And thankfully doing that, I found a handful of blogs that were written by other lost moms that really chronicled their entire journey. And again, having not been through grief at all, I mean, so not grief and certainly nothing like this, complicated grief and out of order deaths and like trauma, the huge amount of trauma that comes alongside this, which again, I didn't even have the words for. Like I remember at one point I like I did thankfully start seeing a therapist, and I joked to her when we was, yeah, it's like I'm traumatized or something. And she was like, whoa.
You are.
You are traumatized.
Right.
I
It's
was just
not
like,
or something. You are.
I'm like making jokes about it. She's like, no, you are entitled to those words. I was like, oh, I thought that was like for like war survivors or like rape survivors. And she was just like, it is, but it's also for what you've been through.
Right. Right. It
I'm like,
includes
yeah,
a
that was
lot of different things, and this is for sure one of them.
Exactly. And that was really again validating to hear because I just, everyone else seemed to move on so quickly, right? I'm just like, why I can't. Like
Right.
I can't. Like it was so bad. But yeah, but it was so again, it was incredibly empowering to read the stories of other parents because it number one, showed me a path through the darkness. I'm just like they were where I was.
And they somehow have made it
They
through.
somehow made it through.
Right.
And it's funny because, everyone like, would ask them and like they try to answer on the blog and then now me being 10 years out, like I'm this person and they're like, how did you do it? And I'm like, and the answer everyone says is I don't really know. I
Right.
just
There's a lot of steps and you're like, it didn't start and end with one thing because you're still kind of there, but you're not in the
there's
same
that, and
grief at
there's
this.
that.
Right. Right.
Exactly. And so, yeah, and people would talk about like integrating your loss and like, what does that mean?
Right.
But it was really helpful to read other women's stories because I could see, like, I still couldn't explain it, but I could see what it meant. Like,
Hmm.
and they, this whole concept of happiness and sadness living together at the same time. I was just like, that doesn't make any sense. And now
Yep.
it's like my entire life. Like,
Yep.
I
I
remember thinking,
remember thinking the exact same thing
yeah,
where
like I would never
afterwards,
smile like this again because
right,
there would always be this shadow hanging over us.
right. And
And
then you laugh for the first time and it takes you back because you're like, am I allowed
like,
to do that? Like what?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, no, but eventually, and it's so interesting because it really does like they live it's not a either or, it's a and.
Hmm.
Like you really can be joyful and laugh and find, a pleasure and hope and like there is good still in the world. And you can still be heartbroken.
Right.
You can still miss your baby and you will every single day.
Right.
And but it's not going to take away from the other stuff.
Right.
The two things are true at the same time. And like that, I just could not wrap my head around at that point. And I still can't wrap my head around it. I can just tell you that I'm sitting here and I'm living proof that, we all get there. We
Right.
all get there. And I remember like when I first, like the first week I was back, home, one of our neighbors, who I didn't know very well, had come to the door and like left a fruit basket. And I kind of like, she was trying to just like leave it and go, but I like kind of caught her at the door unexpectedly because I happened to just be standing there. And she was just like, I'm so sorry. It happened to me. It gets better. And that
Right.
was all
That's
she
the
said.
thing. Nobody talks about it until they find somebody else who's been through it. And then you're like, why didn't I know this before?
Yeah, they come out of the woodwork. I found out there were people I'd
Yes.
known for 30 years who had lost their first child to stillbirth.
Yep.
And that I went to school with their rainbow baby my entire life. And I had no idea.
Right.
Any of this.
Right.
And I mean, and unfortunately it's really sad, but that's the way it was for a long time. That family, the mom told me that when by the time she got out of the hospital, her daughter had been buried and all traces of her removed from the nursery. It was like she never even existed. And
Wow.
everyone thought that that was for the best. That
Right.
was, that was what the doctor told them to do, and I'm like, and it was so hard to process all of this, even still having her nursery here and her stuff around. And like I got rid of a lot of stuff and kind of tried to keep it into that one room at least so I could go there when I wanted to be with her things and then
Mhm.
out when I didn't want to have reminders everywhere, as if there wasn't a reminder constantly just in my head. Um
You touched on this for a second. I just want to go back to it for before we continue. That this person said that when before she even got out of the hospital, her baby was buried and everything was gone. What was that process quickly like for you in terms of when you left the hospital? Did Alana also leave the hospital like at the same time-ish, or how did
yeah,
they
so I
deal with
kind of
that?
yeah, so I kind of skipped over that part, but that was actually a really, really important part of my healing journey. So when we left the hospital, Alana was still there. She was in the morgue. They had offered us the next day to see her again, and we had declined, and which I regretted later. Um, but again, we were just trying to get home and just didn't wanted to pretend none of this had happened. Um, And they had kept her because they needed to do the autopsy and, take the samples for the placental pathology and stuff like that. Um, and they actually did that pretty quickly. I didn't get a
Mm,
report back for like 6 or 8 weeks, which was incredibly painful.
right.
But they were done by it was on a Friday, I think, that she was born, and by Monday, they called to say, okay, everything's good. She can go to what funeral home do you want?
Right. Whatever the next step is.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, I was really lucky in that the local funeral home where the, very few handful of people I knew who had died, had been buried. That was the first place that we reached out to, and not me. I think it must have been I don't even know, it must have been my parents. Um,
Somehow it was set up for you.
Somehow it was set up, and they did everything at cost. They charged us
Wow.
basically for um, they charged us for the coffin, and they charged us for I think whatever they had to pay the like driver of the hearse. And
Wow.
they did everything, and they were again so wonderful there, and took such good care of us. And you know and so yeah, we had set the funeral for like a week. It was like a week after her birth, a little bit more than a week. I think it was the 12th, and she was born on the 4th. um and so leading up to that, we had some time. I really, was focusing on planning the funeral. I just got through planning a wedding, so I just started
Right.
doing the same things to plan the funeral.
And a lot of times that's because of the fact that you're just trying to keep busy because you don't want to stop.
Busy through it, exactly, waiting for these results to come back and stuff. And so we were just focusing on that. And I had all of these right before we went to the hospital, like that last week when I was pregnant. I kind of looked through her drawers. Of course, I washed all of her things and put them away ready to go, so nothing could be returned ever. Um, because, why would I ever need to return the baby clothes?
Right.
Um,
And of course, because you have to wash them before you can even put them on the
Right, put them in the
baby.
baby,
Right.
exactly. So
Right.
I had looked through her stuff, and I was just like, like I for some reason had this innate sense that she wasn't a pink girl, that she would like purple and like teal, like it's like a SIPO. And of course that was not what was popular at the time. So I looked in
No.
every freaking thing in there was pink, and I hadn't bought any of it. It was like people had gifted it to us, and I was just like, you know what? I want to get some stuff for her that I actually like. And so I went online and I bought like some way too expensive baby clothes, but that I really loved and was excited. And I was like, and they got there the day that I was sitting at home laboring. And so I like, quickly did the delicate cycle and like hung them up to dry. I was like, well, I wanted to bring her home from the hospital in these, but I guess that's not gonna happen. So I'll just leave them here on the drying rack, and we'll do newborn photos when we get home. So we got home after, and it's the first thing I see is the drying rack of all these beautiful baby clothes that she'll
Right.
never wear. But I did at least use some of them to bury her in. So I had, so we had like the outfit, and like there were little pieces that were missing and stuff like that. So we, over that week, pieced it together. And like the day before the funeral, my mom had gone, or I think my mom had dropped everything off earlier, and then like the day before the funeral, she had gone there. I don't even remember what for. I think maybe to drop off some other last minute things. And she called, and she was just like, she's out and she's beautiful. You should really go see her.
Aw.
And by this point, again, it had been almost a week, and I was already starting to regret not spending more time. And so me and my husband Deep had been sitting at home like making photo boards about to chronicle her pregnancy and stuff like that. And so we just packed everything up, and we went to the funeral home, and we sat there and did what
Wow.
we were doing. And I did not pick her up or hold her or anything, because again, I was like scared after she'd been through an autopsy and stuff like that. But just to be able to see her and touch her and spend that time with her was so grateful. I'm so grateful I got to do that, because
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I wish, again, like we all do, I wish I had done more. I wish I had known, but I just didn't know at
Right.
the time. So yeah, so we got to make up for it a little bit now, which was nice. And yeah, we had her funeral and stuff the next day, and we had kept it small. We just invited like um family, like, and I have a large family, so just like my immediate cousins and stuff like that. But even with that, it was a pretty big thing. And it was just so weird. Like afterwards we came home, and we had, you know and it was a beautiful day in the fall, and we had everybody over, and we were eating, and we're outside in the yard playing fucking yard games,
Right.
all in black playing yard games. And like the
Right.
neighbors, like, oh, did you have the baby? Like thinking this is everyone over visiting the baby. And we're just like,
You're like, take the cues. We're all in black.
yes. And like, and he of course felt horrible, but I mean, and that was just the beginning, right? Because now that continued to happen for the next year,
Right.
literally.
Right.
And I was lucky. I was lucky enough, again, like I said, I wanted to get pregnant right away, and I did. Like she was born in October. I was pregnant, I think, by March.
Wow.
And I was so taken aback because I thought everything would be better when I was pregnant, and instead,
No, and then it gets way worse because now you've got all these fears compounded.
exactly. I was just like, I had nothing to lose, and now I did.
Right.
And I batted zero so far.
Right.
So it was very hard to believe this is going to be any different.
Right. And every little twinge and every little movement and every non-movement, you're like, what should I call? Should I not call? Do I go to the hospital? Do I not go to the hospital? What do I do?
Yeah, exactly. It was horrific. And and then compounded, of course, by the fact that everyone else, like I thought, thinks that everything's good now. And all people would say, oh, I'm sure everything's going to be just fine this time. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, really? Because I'm sure you would have said that last time too. And
Right. Right. How do you know that? You don't know
yes,
that.
I didn't know that.
Right.
And it was particularly frustrating because my doctors were the same way. I mean, I was now treated as a high-risk pregnancy. And so I got, much better care than before. I got many, more appointments and extra testing, and ended up having an induction at 37 weeks electively, which again is really common for a lot of stillbirth families. You don't have to do it, but by the end your anxiety is so bad
Right.
that it's just like I remember, and I stressed about this so much because again, with coming from off this like natural birth thing, I was like, oh, I don't know if I should do this, blah, blah, blah. And by the end, it was like, nope, yep, definitely going in for the induction as soon as humanly possible. As soon as the door. But yeah, the pregnancy was just, it was so tough. Like because you're sitting in the waiting room next to all these pregnant moms. And, for me, my doctor at the time was actually at the hospital, like in a separate area, but, I would pull into the same parking lot. And, and at the time, I just thought it was grief, right? I just thought it was regular grief, that I would, pull into the parking lot and just like burst into tears and be
No,
like,
it's PTSD.
And but again, no one diagnosed this at that point in time. I didn't know that's what it was.
Right.
And so, like I'm coming into every appointment already just, panic.
Yep.
Sitting there listening. You from the waiting room, you can hear the NSTs that people are getting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like watching other moms go in there and just like sobbing and praying that they're not about to walk into a nightmare that I just walked into, and like, is it going to be me again this time? And like, it was, I mean, pregnancy after loss is, it is hell. It is its own unique.
Right. It's a whole other form of torture.
Exactly. And like, and again, my doctors were very supportive in that, like, they would do anything I asked them to, but it was really clear that they didn't think it was actually physically necessary, that they were just doing it to appease me because they felt bad. And that again felt really invalidating to me because I, again, I like to research things. So I had read everything, all the research out there.
Right.
And I knew that there was, if you have a stillbirth, you're almost 5 times more likely to have another.
Right.
Because so many times there's underlying things and it's not investigated properly. And again, you have to remember at this point, I did not have full answers yet as to what had happened to my daughter. And I'm thinking that it was, that
something
you
did.
I made one wrong move,
right.
She's gone, so it feels like a ticking time bomb, right?
Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. It was such a pleasure speaking with Sam, and we had such a great conversation that we wanted to split it into part 1 and part 2. So if you want to hear the rest of Sam's story, tune in next week. Remember, you are not alone on your journey, and you have the strength to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value so far in today's conversation, please leave a review for Pushing Through Loss and consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for part 2 of the conversation with Sam, and until next time, you got this.